Hello and welcome. Today we've got JuanO'Savin and we'll be discussing military vehicles, Bill O'Reilly with Donald Trump that's happening in December and all the latest updates. Who knows where the conversation can go with JuanO'Savin. Now, just before we begin, you can subscribe to my Telegram channel and to nicholasveniamin.com for my free email updates. I will leave Juan's book link as well in the description so you can have a look at his book as well. Now, if you're watching this for the first time on YouTube, I will leave the link below in the description for the full interview, unless, of course, JuanO'Savin can agree to choose his words wisely, which he usually does.
That's right.
And we can keep the video on YouTube because the censorship is insane, right, Juan?
Yeah, it is. It is.
So first of all, before we begin, I just want to ask you, how are you and what's been happening with you?
Well, I'm working right now on the follow-up to my book, Kid by the Side of the Road. And it's in the second edition right now. The first edition, there's some left that have been going out in 10 packs, and I've allowed that with the signature on one of the books. I don't just sign in one place, I sign like in 5, 6, 7 places. But anyway, that's pretty much gone. Second edition is the one that has the picture of Melania on the back. The first one has a picture of President Trump. And I think they go very nicely together. But the third edition, actually the content is different. And that has, that's the Storm edition. And it's going to be a very important one, I think, and it won't be out for several months, but that's what I'm working on right now, and getting people ready mentally for all the things that have to come in this change up that's coming in the not too distant future. So I needed to take a break. I've been traveling very, very heavily, and I just came to a nice location to do a little bit of work. I've got one of my associates to help me on some of the work that I've got going. And so I'll take a couple of days here, and then I've got heavy travel coming up on the 4th. I've got stuff in Los Angeles on the Sound of Freedom, a meeting there that we're doing. And I think we're basically there for a release just after the first of the year, and should have some announcements, not too long from now on that. And then some stuff in the Southwest on the border with the, this horrendous immigration issue and the child trafficking across the border and the drugs. By the way, this drug thing, people just have no concept how serious this is. I just had a very close friend out of Las Vegas whose daughter died of an overdose earlier this week from the fentanyl. And, people that get hooked on these drugs, it's not like they're the most evil people in the world. The drugs just cook you, and they distort your perception of reality. It's a very sad thing. And so, here's a beautiful family, beautiful parents, other children in the family, but one of them somewhere got bit by the bug. And then this fentanyl is so horrendous in the way that your body can react to it, that, we're having, they enhance some of the other drugs with the fentanyl, and the dosages are all over the map. And so here's somebody that's hooked on the fentanyl and then got an overdose. Your body could be more fragile on a particular day, any given 1,000 things. And, she's gone. This is a huge crisis to the world. The fentanyl's coming out of China, and that's part of this attack, not just on America, but on the world. And we have to be very cognizant of that and sensitive to that. Of course, I've mentioned it before. I may have mentioned it in one of our previous interviews. We did the largest drug seizure, one of the largest in the world history, a couple of years back in Long Beach, California. And in that seizure, we got $5.7 billion worth of drugs, and included in that coming in from China through other locations. Yeah, included in that was enough fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child from Mexico through Canada twice. This is a phenomenal scourge. It's like drilling holes into the foundation of the country as you get more and more people that are hooked on these drugs. It's not just the person that's on the drugs; it's all the people around them that have to slow down or stop their life in order to care for the person who's damaged in this way, who's under this grip. And so here, this friend, in retirement, her and her husband, other siblings, their life stops. They've been dealing with this issue now for a year or two, and then it ends up in this kind of a tragedy. And I think people, they want to prejudge. Oh, it's a horrible person, whatever. No, this was somebody that got bit by the bug, and it's a very sad thing. So,
well, I wanted to say a very big condolences to the family and to you as well, and the friends. I'm very sorry to hear that. So you're saying that the Chinese are infiltrating a big drug project, if you like, to depopulate the world. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think certainly it's an attack on the foundations of Western society. And these drugs being shipped into the country, if you get right down to it, even $5.7 billion worth of drugs, by the time you pay to manufacture it, ship it, all the other stuff, what are the people at the beginning actually making out of this? A few tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Is their motive purely the cash? With things controlled as much as they are by the government in China, is this really happening in a vacuum? Or is this part of a plan, an intent to, get these drugs into the West? And I would have to say that there's far more to the planning with intent to undermine the West, because they have this desire, this intent to dominate the world, to take over the world in so many ways. And so getting us bogged down internally by playing to the weaknesses of those amongst us and making it easy to, get off in these things, that's part of drilling holes in the foundation of America. And then just like this building that collapsed the other day in Florida, there certainly is lots of wild speculation out there, but the reality is the building, where it failed, even though it's very rare occurrence, probably here in the West, at least, especially that big. We've had building failures like this around the world, fairly more often than people would like to think. And it goes to the corrosion. If you get salt damage to the rebar that goes inside the concrete, and it was the sea side, the water side of the building that collapsed, where it gets the most of the salt-laden moisture. You get cracks in concrete, very minute, and the corrosion gets started. And then as it really gets going, it acts like if you've ever had water in an ice tray and you see that it expands. Water has huge hydraulic pressures that can just break concrete up and push it apart. The salt getting on the iron in the rebar has a similar effect, and then the concrete, and it pushes it apart, and so it weakens it. And where it collapsed was right on these pillars where the rebar is coming out, and so all of a sudden, you reach a tipping point and breaking point, and once one went, the weight took others out.
Right.
It's the same thing with society.
Mhm.
It's one thing to, if you have a garment and a seam goes out, you can take it to a seamstress and they can sew that seam up, and you'd never know there was a problem. Just because a thread unraveled somewhere and in a seam, you can fix it very easily. It's another thing though when the fabric itself starts to tatter and become frayed, and now you don't just boom and it's repaired, because it's the threads themselves are coming unraveled, and you just have to throw a patch over it or whatever. It won't look very good. The reality is that that's what's happening in our society. We're coming unraveled, and that's the intent from a demonic, satanic perspective,
Mhm.
by whatever means necessary to destroy society, the ability of people to live together. When you have huge segments of your population that can't function because they're hooked on drugs, they don't go to work, they don't get up on time, they need other people to help them get around, they can't earn their own way, they're unwilling to do certain things, they lose contact with reality, and all of a sudden whole families, whole sections of society are held back. It's like a boat anchor from being able to move forward and do the things we're supposed to do. And so if from the devil's viewpoint, take out a portion, it's 1 in 100. Well, that 1 in 100 holds another 10 down and makes them less productive. And then you add damage from other things, whether it be medical problems that are natural or things that are induced. You throw in, kids that are damaged with various types of dysfunction because they didn't get educated right, they didn't get cared for properly when they're young. Within a society,
Absolutely.
like here in America, we have all this immigrant push into America, and so what's happening? One of my associates is dealing with children who are being brought in over the border and get picked up, and they don't have parents with them, they don't have brothers or sisters with them that are adults. They're all by themselves, and then they have all sorts, besides the medical issues, they have all sorts of emotional, mental, post-traumatic stress syndrome, literally. And this doctor friend said, that's the worst of it, is these are children who are being used in somebody else's war, that are being pushed out of where they lived very traumatically, and then they're being placed here, supposedly go to foster homes, but then you have to question what's really going on there, and are they really foster homes? Look, that's what Sound of Freedom talks about, the child trafficking that's taking place right under our noses here in the society, and it's horrendous. It's not comprehensible to most people, and so that's why this has to be shown in the movie, to help people to understand this is another way of drilling holes in the fabric of society, and that's what's going on right now. And all of a sudden one day, if you drill enough holes in the foundation of America, just like that building in Florida, they're not looking for a very linear going downhill and going down the slope. We're looking at some catastrophic, nonlinear collapse that just instantaneously takes out a huge section of society. And then the other thing is, just like in Florida, people were trapped in the building, but not in the collapsed part. When the building collapsed, it blew debris into the stairwells of the rest of the building. And then, of course, you couldn't run the elevators and things like that. So you had people trapped on the other sides of the building that were still intact. But of course, what would the fear be? Is the rest of the building going to come down? Is the fact that it's, broken to this point mean that in some short while, the rest of it goes down? You got all these people trapped in the building to get out. And even the firefighters going in to rescue them, are they going into something that's going to collapse the rest of the way any minute? Very, very traumatic. And so if you have some kind of a nonlinear collapse in America, does it lead to the rest like dominoes going down, or do we have time to try and put things back together again? And those are the kind of questions that are out there that, people that know how close we are here in America and across the rest of the world to some kind of a collapse, be it in the monetary system, a military engagement, a medical crisis. There's multiple things. Any one of them could suddenly catastrophically collapse in a way that you didn't anticipate seconds before. And so knowing how fragile society is, and then the devil himself and all of his minions are out there drilling one more hole, one more hole, one more hole. And who knows when you get to that one more hole that suddenly that's it. I mean, there was some tiny bit of corrosion, some tipping point on just one rebar, one little group of rebar, and finally the gossamer's thread snapped, and the rest happened almost instantaneously. And that's what the devil wants for the world.
Yes,
wants for America. And it sounds a bit over the top, maybe religious or something to even refer to it in good and evil terms. But I'm telling you that the people that are seeking to destroy the West are doing the work of evil. To most people, it's just a difference of opinion. It might be politics, it's whatever. But I think that's actually sophomoric. The reality is there is evil, and that evil seeks to dominate the rest of us. And those players that are involved there, they have an attitude, I got mine, too bad about you. Mm-hmm. And it's a survival of the fittest, the strongest. There's always been, that's the mentality of those that would enslave others, is that, they have to do it. They somehow deserve to be on top. There was the right to rule by blood. And that's part of the thing here in America, is that we don't have a royalist perspective. And we find that to be very anti-American. Every man a sovereign. And we're not going to be ruled by people just because they were born in the right lineage. We're going to be ruled by people who will be subject to all the people and do it as a service, not as a right of dominion to dominate those around us. Those that want to drill holes in the fabric of society and the foundation of America and the West, they want to collapse our ability to self-govern. So they have to come in and manage us and take care of us and tell us what to do and when, and dominate us. We don't want to be dominated. That's the American spirit. That's why I like my hat. That's why I like my boots. Very American. Okay. Yeah. I get out there in the ranch. I do what I got to do. I take care of stuff. I don't need somebody to tell me when to mend a fence. I don't need somebody to tell me when to go take care of the horses and get up in the morning and make sure that the livestock's taken care of. I do that myself. I don't need a manager to tell me what to do. And I don't want a manager to tell me what to do. Even if you have people that are working together in a ranch type situation, it's a very, there has to be a lot of agreement. A lot of things happen without being told what to do because everybody knows what their responsibilities are. That's part of this societal thing here in the West. We self-govern, we self-manage. Every man is a maverick, and you choose to course your life. In these communist systems, they decide, well, we need more engineers this week. We need more janitors this week. We need more doctors this week. And so if you have a little bit of an aptitude, that's what you're doing. it is far more managed and controlled from birth to death. And then when they decide that your value to the world has gone down and you don't offer enough, well, then you should do your duty to society by self-eliminating. You should end your life because you're not valuable anymore. It's a machine mentality.
Absolutely.
That is not us. That is not America. That's not the West. That's not what you folks want. We fought a revolution here in America to not be under somebody else's thumb, not to send our resources out to do other people's bidding, and not to have other people come in and subvert our political system in order to use our military to do their bidding, to use our tax money to do their bidding out into the world. That's mischief. It's not actually doing good. It's doing their little private scams for little private groups. That's why we're very anti this whole green revolution, because we see it as a fraud. And in most of the ways. And of course, the devil was known as the green man because he hid amongst the leaves of the tree in the garden. And so the green man is actually another name for Satan himself, the devil, Lucifer, goes by 1,000 names. So we're not fooled that there's this intent to deceive the world, starting here with the West, to do somebody else's bidding. The devil's still at work out across the world, and he has his servants that have made their vows. It's just that simple. If people want to live in denial, well, they can live in denial, but it's a fact.
Absolutely. You're right. It's a fabricated machine, whereas we should all be learning the same knowledge so that we are all equal and we are all leaders and there are no followers. And, like Alex Collier says, everyone can be the president and there are no followers. And because we all have the same knowledge. Now, I want to go back a little bit where you mentioned about the Chinese weapons that were infiltrated in the US, starting from Mexico, that could wipe out everyone till, from Mexico to Canada. And you said also it could wipe out everyone twice. Now, when were they expecting this to happen, and have the White Hats stopped it from happening?
Well, that was a drug seizure that was done. It's actually kind of interesting. I forget whether it was 2018 or 19. I think it was 2019. We had February 2nd, I believe was the date that we did those seizures. And what happened was we had a military exercise that was scheduled in the area of Long Beach, California. And that military exercise was well published, publicized, etc. What happened was, in that same time frame, we had a bunch of military helicopters that landed 9:00 at night on Wilshire Boulevard, one of the busiest streets in the world. Wilshire Boulevard is in the North Los Angeles area. It's a very elite area. In fact, there's a long story. I'll spare your listeners, but E.L. Cord, who made the Cord motor car, when he engineered a collapse in the Cord stock, he took out $38 million, which at this time was a tremendous amount of money. And it was in the collapse period of the Cord Motor Company. And what he'd done is he had set it up to where he owned all of the sub-suppliers who made the starters, the gears, other products, and then sold them to Cord Motor Company. And then he kept raising the prices to where the car became almost unsellable because it was just so extreme. And he put rumors out in the market that the company was going to go bust any minute. So people started doing something called shorting. And they were shorting the stocks. All the brokers, hearing the rumors behind the scenes, they were, let's just say for the sake of discussion, the stock is $50. Mm-hmm. And they think it's going to go down. So they would sell shares today at $50, and they would have a certain period of time, essentially a week, to actually come up with the shares. And then a week from now, or a month from now, they'd actually have to give the shares to the person that bought them. That's shorting. And today we have futures, which allow for longer periods. That was a futures thing. We have puts and calls, and we have an options market, the Chicago Board Options Exchange, where this is actually done very precisely. But in those days, it wasn't quite the same. And so a broker could sell, but they had a certain number of days to actually show up with the stock and convey it. Well, what they were doing is they were selling huge amounts of stock at the higher price and then coming up with it days later when the stock was lower, and they'd make the difference in between. So let's just say, for discussion, that they sold it at 50. And then a week later, they bought it at 40 and immediately conveyed the stock. Now they made the $10 in between. If you sold, a million shares, you'd make 40 million, or you'd make $10 million. And so they were doing this, and lots of brokers were doing it. Well, the amount of shares that were outstanding, which I think at the time was like 200 million, they actually sold more shares than existed. And they were coming up with more and more shares, to where they got the Cord stock way down, almost, a few dollars, a share. And literally they have, 5-6 times the number of shares that even exist, having been sold by these brokers. Now, the person that actually had been buying the shares all the way along, because E.L. Cord had a plan, he was buying all these shares up covertly. As it got closer and closer to the bottom, he had bought the original shares. He owned the original shares. He didn't own just promises of shares. He actually owned the shares and had the paper certificates. Now, as it gets almost to the bottom, the brokers have only a short while to come up with the shares, and then they have to replace them. And the danger is, if you as a broker seated on the exchange don't convey the shares, you could lose your seat. You could lose your ability to be a broker. So you have these big brokerage houses that have a lot of, they're trading, gazillions of dollars day to day for all sorts of clients, and on, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different stock positions. They had done this as a little side way to make a few extra bucks. And they all were so smart to be able to do this. And they, do it in plain sight. And everybody did it. Well, what the problem was, is they got down to almost, worth nothing. Now they have to come up with the real shares, and they're all thinking, oh, it's no big deal, no big deal. I got it. Well, they can't find shares. So all of a sudden, the value of Cord stock started to suddenly rocket and go up. Plus, E.L. Cord, he's got loan money coming in. Somebody miraculously is going to save him. Somebody wants to buy him out. The rumors are going all through the market. And all of a sudden, even though he's actually got a different plan, he's scamming everybody. And so now the brokers are thinking it's going the other way. Not only is there pressure to buy stock to replace the stock that you already pre-sold, now the pressure is the stock might actually recover and do even better. So now you got speculators coming in because the price is low. It's going to be saved. It's going to make a lot more money. It was worth this much before. Now it's going to be worth way more. So all of a sudden, the pressure's on. So Cord takes these shares that he actually physically owns, and he starts sifting them into the market, but very slowly. And so things don't collapse completely, but these brokers that are in very exposed conditions, look, they were going to make, a few $1 million on a little scam, but they're going to lose their seat that makes them tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. If they got to pay extra, they just got to pay it. They just got to pay it because they got to keep their seat. They can't lose their brokerage license. They can't lose their seat on the exchange. So they pay what they have to pay. Just do it. They'll take it out of some other account. They'll rip off some other customer. So all of a sudden, Cord stock starts rocketing to outer space. I mean, it was headed for like 200 a share or something, as I recall, by the time it was over with. And he's selling out his real shares, taking the real money. So in the course of doing this, all of a sudden, the government's coming in looking to find out what in the world is going on here. And but in the meantime, he'd taken out cash, and he has cash. He has $38 million, and he has it in 2 golden valises. My friend, that's the way he described it. I didn't even know what a valise was when he first told me this years and years ago when I was a kid. And he says, no, it's 2 golden valises. They're literally huge suitcases. I mean, monstrous ones you take on a cruise on a boat or whatever. Has $38 million. He gets 2 of Al Capone's bodyguards, and then a crew of guys that are there as his protection. Gets on a private rail car and comes out to California, and stayed with my friend, and spent the next 8 months buying up all the land north of Los Angeles that now is Wilshire Boulevard. Bought up land for 20 miles, everything he could get his hands on. And then that was built out into all of this fabulous business area. And all this time, while he's buying land, everybody's looking for him on the East Coast to explain what happened with the Cord Motor Company, explain all stuff. And so the Blue Sky Laws, which is has to do with reporting on shares that are outstanding, what's being traded, how much is out there floating. The Blue Sky Laws are a result of what E.L. Cord did in kind of this mischief he did on the E.L. Cord stock. That's the background of the Cord Motor Company at the very end when they went out. And he had this plan in place for a very long time. That was his plan in buying up all the suppliers of products and doing that. So even when Cord Motor Company went bust, he owned all of these other companies and did fine doing other stuff, especially, supplying materials for war and like that. And but so Wilshire Boulevard is this very wealthy area, businesses, hotels, shops, etc. And on Wilshire Boulevard, there's a section where there's an underground bus section to get some of the traffic off the main street that services a bunch of the hotels up the street. And at the beginning of that section is a 3 or 4 story building that had some attorney's offices, and then the Guatemalan Cultural Exchange, which was just some kind of a business, but it's a intergovernment thing, for providing stuff to, services to Guatemala and blah, 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 So in that building, there was something, and it was so important, so scary, that we sent in 2 what we call nest teams. They're usually used for nuclear materials or devices to search it out in a city. And there's certain signatures that you might see that you could detect to track something that might be, we thought about it with the suitcase nukes and things like that. And so these teams are there for an emergency response system. And so 2 of these teams came in right there in Wilshire Boulevard, no warning. It was later reported that this was just a training exercise, and that, they told everybody there was going to be a training exercise in the LA area, not to be shocked if you saw helicopters and stuff like that running around because they were doing this big training exercise out by Long Beach. The reality is we have lots of places to train to do these kinds of things if we need to. With zero warning, they came in and landed right there in downtown Los Angeles on Wilshire Boulevard. Guys got out, started stopping traffic. There's no police. There's no, cordoning the area off. In fact, people were holding a party in a condominium next to this. And it was so shocking to the people. They were taking their cell phones and recording what was going on. In other words, the building wasn't evacuated, and they're right there in eyesight of what's going on down below. That's important because it helps to show that this was not an exercise. This was the real deal. And it was cover that they had an exercise going on there. But they came in, helicopters hovered over the top of the building. Men rappelled out. They went into the building from the roof. They blew an explosive from inside the building. Someone had conveniently popped some windows open so the blast pressure would not break all the glass out. And but there were concussion grenades. And then they went in and took some things, came out through the bottom of the building. Helicopters landed in the street outside. There was about a dozen helicopters total, and then there was some overflight up high. That's not seen in the videos. And they came out with 2 stretchers. The stretchers are actually carry what's it's a nest bag. It's a type of Kevlar material that can contain a small explosion, and it releases pressure by expanding like a Jiffy Pop popcorn bag. It even in a small tactical nuke, it would lower the area that it would damage, would kill everybody right there, but it might reduce the overall shock value, concussive value of a device, and contain some of the material. But small, weapons with plastic explosive or dynamite, stuff like that, it could almost contain it completely. Very, very complex material. They came out with these 2 stretchers with nest bags that are designed for this type of a thing, and got in 2 separate helicopters, one being biological and one being radiological, and went different directions. Now, at that building, if that had been, if whatever the plan was, that had been released into society, into the environment, you have all these workers going to those hotels right down the street every day. If you'd got to those workers going into the hotels, and if they had gotten sick from a viral thing or from some type of a pathogen, bacteriological, etc., just think Ebola types of things and like that, even simple viruses like a corona or something like that, then if they get sick and convey that to people staying at the hotels, they go out and they get on the airplanes and go all over the world. You'd have had a place where that could have affected tens and tens of thousands that travel from those hotels. It's not like affecting people that go home and just work in a community. It spreads it far and wide if it was a pathogen. And the radiological, that building was scheduled for demolition about 2 weeks later. So let's say that they were, going to do something to release it. The bad guys were going to do something to release it. Let's say they were 3, 4, 5 days from doing it. And it takes a few days to realize what's going on, identify the epicenter. And about the time you come in with teams to figure out what's going on, while they're there to search through and try to figure out, why are all these people getting sick at these hotels and who traveled from there and all that. Now the radiological goes off, and it doesn't have to be an explosion. Remember, the building's getting ready to be demolished. If the debris from the building is going into dump trucks being driven out through the city, you're spreading that radiological dust, low-level waste material out across the whole city on all the traffic lanes, etc. You'd have shut down Los Angeles. You'd have immobilized it, and the impact out through the rest of society and on the world, and then the fear of this disease being loose and people traveling internationally, etc. You'd have had something similar to what we've experienced for the last year and a half, a year or two earlier, and it could have been very, very devastating. It is interesting that the a few days before that is when Nancy Pelosi was conveniently, who's the representative out of California, that she conveniently was taking 93 family members and leaving the country and going to Afghanistan and then to Egypt for a couple-week vacation at the taxpayer's expense. But we were in the middle of a budget war. And so the government was shut down. And so President Trump wouldn't sign the authorization for the fuel use and use of a military aircraft for her excursion. And so she had to stay home, and all of her family had to stay home. They could have traveled on private aircraft, but they wouldn't spend the money. Mm-hmm. And so they just had to stay home. But she would have conveniently, and all of her family would have been out of the country if this attack had in fact occurred. Now, at the same time as this event on Wilshire Boulevard, in the port of Long Beach, which is one of the busiest ports on planet Earth, when you're there, I kept a boat there in I can't think of the name of the town now. It's right at the north tip of the area there at the El Sobrante or something like that. And so when I was in town, I'd stay on the boat there. It was very convenient. And when you go through that harbor area, it's just amazing how big it is, how many ships come and go, how many containers there. It's just phenomenal. And in the port of Long Beach, at the same time when this military exercise was going on, they actually used the exercise as cover for this seizure of these drugs there in the port from various containers, various operations. They went in there and got it all. So obviously you have to think what was going on. Well, they had intelligence that was specific enough in nature to go in amongst these tens and tens of thousands of containers, find the exact loads and shipments and get it. Now, the other thing that was going on that same week was the week that El Chapo, the Mexican drug trafficker, was convicted. And it's also the week that Keith Raniere, the NXIVM, which was the sex cult, was also picked up. And so Keith Raniere was convicted. And so there's been speculation that in both cases they made deals to get something lighter for their family, ignore other stuff, specifically El Chapo precisely. And that they may have given up the locations of those drugs and the operations and methods to do that. But again, even with the drugs coming in from Mexico right now, right, the chemicals that are being used to process these drugs are coming out of China. Wow. So even the vehicles, the weapons, etc., are coming out of China. In fact, one of the things people forget this, 20 years ago, we had one of the biggest arms shipments in history of the United States that was seized, and it was container loads. I think it was 50,000 AK-47s that were being transferred on ships at Long Beach, loads to go to Mexico. So 50,000 AK-47s going to Mexico to the drug traffickers in Mexico, that can't be good.
No.
And this is the kind of stuff that's been going on for a very long time. And, we have our border issue with Mexico is getting worse, not better, and has been for a long time, acting as though this is somehow just situation normal. As bad as it's been for a very long time. Remember, it's more dangerous to live in Mexico right now than it has been in Afghanistan for a couple of decades. So you think of all the drama in Afghanistan, you think of the dramas in Iraq and the fighting that's gone on there. And it's more dangerous in parts of Mexico than it is in Afghanistan or Iraq. That's a very serious situation. It's right on the border with America. People have no concept of just how screwed up it is down there. And then the politics of the region, the Salinas family, the connections to the drugs there, connections to XIVM and the Salinas family, other very wealthy families where, they speak against it all the time. And yet, the tracking of all these people that are coming in by the drug gangs is done through their cell phones, through their cell phone system. Very conveniently, they haven't got a pot to piss in, but they got a cell phone, and all their family does too, so they can be tracked the whole way through. It's very insidious. It's very dark. It's very evil. It's happening right under our noses, and the politicians that don't take action to stop this, that are unwilling to stop it, is because they have people around them who are benefiting by having this trafficking occur. And ultimately, they're selling out the West. And these people are just the victims. They're selling out the West for a few dollars. They're like Judas's. For a few pieces of silver, they're destroying their own land. And they're hurting all of these people. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the most vulnerable group is the children. It's horrible. What's happening to the children is, children are always the ones that fight the wars. And so we're in this situation where the children are paying the price. And then my doctor friend is down there treating children with all of the emotional damage beyond the medical that are being pushed into the United States and then farmed out all over the place, into these foster situations. Everybody's paying for it. And it's not good for the children. It's not good for the towns that they're being sent to. We've tracked the aircraft going to all these different places. And again, ultimately it weakens, drills holes in society. And, with using the most vulnerable of all these children. So the long and short of it is that we have a moment here where we have to decide, are we going to allow this to continue, or are we going to find a way to stop it? And most of all, for these children, that at this moment in time in the planet, there's more slaves on planet Earth today than through all prior human history up until, 25, 30 years ago combined. Mm-hmm. And you could say, well, the population of the planet's bigger. Okay. But on what planet, in what world are we supposed to accept in this modern era that slavery happens? It's unfortunate. I feel so bad. It just seems very shallow. You cannot, as, be human, and accept for some people slavery is a way of life. And the majority of the slaves on the planet are children.
Absolutely.
We can't allow that. There's sins of commission and there's sins of omission. Whatever's happening that people are not getting it, taking it seriously, allowing it, whatever it is that's got people allowing it to be the case, it has to stop. And it has to be somewhere, and that's us people. If you can't protect the children, if you can't protect the most innocent amongst us from this kind of enslavement, then you reach out to God. Oh, God bless America. God bless the world. Help us out here and there. Hey, if you're not protecting the children and doing your part, why would God do anything for you? And where do you come from that you think God's supposed to bless that which is evil, and then you conscience it, you allow it in your presence? God's, he's not laughing. That's a stern face, because he gave the planet to Adam and his seed. It's our responsibility to tend and groom and manage that which he's given us. If we're inadequate, if the devil's got a place where he's got a hold of us somehow, then we have to ask for divine assistance. But he won't intervene unless we give him permission. We request him to do so. And we need God's help right now to stop these monsters. It's an attack by a satanic mentality and perspective to the world. And remember, in the biblical narratives, and you find it in other religions also, it's not just biblical, but I use that because most of the people in our audience have some point of reference there from biblical perspective. Well, the promised land, Israel, was this, important, beautiful place for all these, biblical figures, and God himself was there with the temple and everything else. The reality is the hills around Israel, on the hills around the cities, were where the Baal and Moloch worshipers were sacrificing children. And the children came from those communities so they could have a good harvest, so they could have safety, etc. So in this area that's supposed to be so good, unbelievable evil was taking place at the same time. And I would contend that today in our societies around the world, and especially here in the West, great evil is happening right in plain sight, right in front of us. The devil's having a heyday. And most people are complacent. They're blind. They're asleep to what's going on. And you want to have safety from disease. You want to have safety from attacking marauding armies. You want to have safety financially. And you're asking God to look and help and, make it all nice and everything else. But you won't lift a finger to stop what's happening around you. I think it's a very shallow perspective that would think that that is anywhere in God's plan to bless anything when he's given us this as a responsibility, and we won't take care of our own responsibilities. And that's part of this thing with the Western mentality. Every man a sovereign, every man a maverick, a personal self-reliance and attentiveness to their duties. And one of those duties is at a societal level to not allow certain things in our presence, with our money, with our resources, with our governments. The governments work for the people, and they are not there ruling the people. And to the extent they think they have some right to rule over us, whether it be an individual or a group, we will tear that down. We will stop it. We will stop the money flow to it. Yes. We will legislate against it. We will not allow it to be done that way in our world. We won't participate in it. And that's when we're doing our job as people, we self-govern. And that includes not allowing a government in our name to take our money and use it in inappropriate ways. And so that's this moment that we're in. That's this challenge. Who's going to actually decide how the people's resources are spent? And even who's going to decide who gets to be those people to make those decisions? Is there some undermining going on? Yes, that's what the whole challenge is on the election, and looking forward into the future.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to say that the last election, well, it's over, it's done, it's whatever. If you can't get to justice in the 2020 election with all the fraud that's there, you'll never get to justice again, because they've changed the rules now. You can't even look at it. It's not about, there's a certain mentality that it's about having a secure election in the future and not allowing all the mischief in the future and getting to a valid count in the future. Look, we've been talking about that for as long as I can remember. We've been arguing over whether the votes are being frauded for a very long time. You're going to do a better job? No, you're not. This last one isn't over. We're going to get to the bottom of it. It's about election fraud, not election integrity merely. We'll get to election integrity by getting through the fraud and determining it in the past over this last election.
Just careful with your words, Juan, because we want to put this on YouTube. You know.
Well, and I try to mince it as close as I could.
Yeah,
that's part of the point. They do not want us to have an honest conversation, and I get that completely.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely. And also when you say, the big question is if we can't respect ourselves, our families, and, we create technology to kill each other, then what is our value as a human race? Now, I want to move on to our next point. Now, on the 18th of January this year, 2021, there was a military man on a Patriots news channel. I think it was OAN, and he was saying how there's been a military transfer of power, and this was just 2 days before the inauguration. Okay, now, and then we see a lot of vehicles around, military vehicles around the DC area. So what is really going on? Are we under military?
Well, let's be really clear here. There's a bunch of people that have been saying that the military is in complete control and that Donald Trump's in charge of the military. That's not accurate. A couple of things. What I've said is that, first of all, you have to understand how the American system is laid out. We have the administrative, which is the president, and the executive offices under the president. So Justice Department, which is like FBI and policing agencies and like that, are under the direct authority of the executive or the president of the United States and those executive administrative offices. Then on one side, you have Congress. Congress is the representatives of the states, and they vote the laws that they want to enact, how the money is going to be spent, who gets it, what it does, et cetera, how much it's going to be. So the legislative side is the House of Representatives, and those people are elected 2 years at a time. Mm-hmm. On the Senate side, they approve the money, how it's spent. And so you can pass all the legislation you want. If there's no money passed to actually do what you want to do, nothing's happening. And so they're elected for 6 years at a time. The executive's offices are elected at 4 years at a time. And so the president has a term of 4 years. And then on the other side, you have the courts, the Supreme Court and all the district courts at the federal level out across the states. Now, what they do is they look at the laws and the money and the executive stuff and decide if something's been done legally according to the Constitution, according to the laws of the nation. And so they decide these things. So you have the executive, the legislative with spending, and the judicial. Beyond that group, of which the president presides over the administrative part of our government, and the policing action, the internal operation of America. We also have the military. Now, the military is to protect us against enemies foreign, from outside threats that would try to come in and steal. The policing is the threats that are internal, the Al Capones, the gangs, laws that might work against one group against another within the state, how the money is spent, et cetera, to one person's advantage against another one. And that's all internal to the operation of America. The policing or the military is towards threats external to America, other countries trying to do things that might damage America, damage our interests, come in and steal from us from the outside, the thieves from within, the threats from within, or the threats from without. And that person that is in charge of the military at the highest position is the commander in chief. So the president wears two hats as president of the United States, president of the administration of government inside the United States in the normal day-to-day civilian affairs. And then the commander in chief hat. Now, which hat's more important? In a normal situation, a normal world, every day, the president administrating over the affairs of government within our country is the most obviously critical in the day-to-day operation of America. It's the one that the world sees. Mm-hmm. But in a wartime situation, if there's a real attack, if there's threats, the more critical position, the more critical hat, the superior authority of the two is the commander-in-chief hat. And if we're under attack, external, everything domestic and internal is subservient to the external attack. And so the commander-in-chief hat is far more critical and important. And within that location of the military, at the highest tier, a different strata altogether, is the operation of the nuclear forces, because that's where if an attack was to come and you only have minutes to respond with a weapon of mass destruction, it doesn't have to be nuclear bombs, by the way. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. A digital attack has the same potential damage or more than nuclear bombs flying through the air, because with a digital attack, you could shut down pipelines like happened in America here, where we had an oil gas pipeline out of Canada that was shut down by hackers. So the pipeline wouldn't flow and it cut off fuel supplies. It was in the late spring, so it wasn't horrible, but what if it happened in the middle of winter and you can't heat houses and you have all sorts of problems? It was just one pipeline. What if a hacker comes in and shuts off electricity? What if they hack and do other kinds of communications damage? The 911 systems won't work, things like that. The dams don't work right. There's lots of ways that a digital attack could be devastating and shut down the country in ways that you might not recover for a long time. And so a digital attack can be potentially even more destructive ultimately than a nuclear bomb or a series of nuclear bombs. Even though one sounds worse right off the bat, a digital attack could be very horrible. Same thing with an attack with viral or bacterial or poisons, like fentanyl is a poison. And in the water supply and the food supply, other stuff, you might not be able to have the country work right. People dying off because the fentanyl's been seeded into all sorts of things. You can't trust your food supply or something would be horrible. So there's lots of ways that you can have an attack where it's not just the military response, but it's this upper strata where the commander-in-chief is the one who has command of the nuclear forces and beyond.
Right.
And that role, even within the military, it's a whole separate group within the military that handle those types of threats. It's isolated in most locations from the rest of the broad action of the military troops and forces and deployments and everything else. The security clearances are a separate strata, again, for those that are involved in those types of protections. And so even in the military, commander-in-chief may not exercise down through all the ranks, because there's generals and other people, and like anything else in politics, maybe you want to go a certain way and got a bunch of people that don't feel the same way, and they can do little things, niggling things that undermine what you're trying to do. So it is interesting that Cheyenne Mountain was closed up March 15th of 2020 and is still closed up on a wartime footing. And of course, other similar types of operations as though we were under some imminent threat in a wartime scenario. The idea being that the virus could get people sick and then those facilities wouldn't be able to work. So by isolating them, they were not being offered the opportunity to become infected. And so those groups, those forces that are operating inside that bunker command situation, controlling our missile forces and nuclear forces, are still isolated from the general population. So there's no danger of them becoming unable to work due to a contagion. With that in mind, if you take the mentality that with multiple things from multiple fronts, America's been under attack, whether it be drugs coming in the country, things coming in with the immigrants that are flooding the borders, potential digital attack to take out our leadership. You know, if there's some question as to whether or not you had a legitimate vote and somebody else put in other leaders, do you have Manchurians or do you have people that are working on behalf of other countries or business groups that are not doing the bidding of the American people? And because you snuck them in there via some kind of fraud, I have to be very careful with my words. I'm trying to stay within the tone of what we're saying. So I apologize if it sounds like I'm slow to come up with exactly what I'm saying, but I think most people understand where I'm going with that. So with that in mind, if you look at it that way, the key thing, and I've said it to your audience before, I've said it to other audiences, but sometimes you got to hear it a few times. So I'll say it one more time. In fact, let me just add this. I did a show the other day with Michael Jacko, and I didn't finish one thought, and it bothered me. And so let me finish it on your show, and hopefully people will catch this. When we had the vote, there's a executive order that was put in place September 12th, 2018, that requires that within 45 days of any federal election here in the United States, that the Director of National Intelligence has to provide a report within 45 days that outlines whether or not there was any foreign interference in that election. In this last one, the election was on 11/3. The report had to be submitted by 12/18, December 18th, 45 days later. It was not. And because some of the agency people was supposed to be submitted to the president and to the various agency directors inside the Homeland Security Group, it wasn't provided timely in 45 days. It didn't finally arrive until January 19th, one day before the vote or before the inauguration of President Biden. The Congress and the courts, the Supreme Court, had already decided that Biden won the election, and so they made him president of the United States, of the administration of the United States. That strata, the administration, the congressional, and the courts. And there was this agreement, and he was put in place as president. Joe Biden is president of the United States. Anybody that says otherwise isn't understanding. Joe Biden was made president of the United States. Congress and the courts agreed to that. We can argue over whether their judgment was sound, whether they failed to do certain protective things, but he is president of the United States. But on that date, prior to January 20th, the military has no they don't do civilian things. They leave the civilian side, the administration of government alone. They do what they're told, essentially, because an administrator, the administrative side coordinates their activities. In fact, the Joint Chiefs, which are the military advisors to the president and to Congress, the National Security Council, which are advisors to the president and to Congress, the NSC is what that's the term most time. Those are civilian administrative positions. They advise the administration, they advise the Congress on matters related to the military, but they don't run the military. They're out of the military most of the time, and they advise on matters related to the military. Now, the moment that they were required, the military side was required to acknowledge and accept the elected representative of the people, the president, as the new commander-in-chief. If there was some concern as to whether or not something had happened, this is a Manchurian candidate, this is somebody that is not the true representative of the people. For some reason, they're being blackmailed, they're under some kind of influence operation. Then the military would have to do their own investigation separate from the investigation that was done by Homeland Security on the civilian side of the operations. And using the 45-day model that was given to the civilian side with Homeland Security and the Director of National Intelligence. Director of National Intelligence, there's 16 investigative agencies in the federal Homeland Security system. And then there's a supervisory agency, and that's the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence, for a total of 16 subgroups, and then one primary overlooking all of them. So 17 total. And so when they didn't get the report in time to be acted on, with less than a day for consideration out amongst all the agencies, there was no time to protect. If there was foreign interference, there's no time to react to it. Congress and courts had already made their decision. Then the authority and the requirement to protect the American people, to protect the Constitution, which is the contract between the American people and its government, and to protect the Republic, which is the Union of States, the 50 states, and the protectorates, Puerto Rico, Guam, places like that, from some kind of foreign control through some kind of fraud, be it elected or otherwise. Could be, somebody put a, clone in or something. So the military has to determine if, in fact, they're handing control over to somebody that is the honest representative of the American people, or if they're under some kind of foreign influence, they're drugged, they're mind controlled electronically, something happened, and they're going to do something against the American people, even though they have this position of authority. The military has to not hand over control to an invalid, improper person who's working against the American interest. At the moment that they were required to hand control to a new commander-in-chief, that was when they would have had to react somehow. And so if we use the 45-day rule for the civilian side, it would be a reasonable expectation to say that the military would have operated with the same type of a time frame if the missiles weren't flying that second. If the missiles are flying that second, a general in the command bunker, if he doesn't believe that the person at the briefcase, the suitcase, the football is the true representative of the people, is the lawful commander-in-chief for some reason, or is under some kind of foreign influence. The general and command bunker, all that suitcase, briefcase is a handshake agreement. It doesn't actually do anything. It's a communications device to the men in the bunkers, in the E3Bs, the EC3Bs, that are the command and control aircraft and other locations that actually handle missile control, handle deployment of the subs, handle military forces for an emergency response from the nuclear side or anything in that level, weapons of mass destruction. And, for example, President Biden, I'll say it, President Biden, Joe Biden, I'll give him the respect that Congress and the courts intend. He can put his Toys R Us keys, red, green, blue, whatever they got at the sale for the kids, into the briefcase. He can put his eyeball up there. He can push all the buttons. Unless the general agrees with whatever is done at that briefcase, nothing is happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or if it needs to happen and you have seconds to go, the general can make the decision and the president's out of the loop, because let's say that we were attacked. If submarines are off the coast, flight time intercontinental missiles can take half an hour to an hour. When they have to decelerate down to hypersonic speeds, they're not going as fast as they are when they're going out through space. And Mach 14, 15 are compared to Mach 5 or 6 or 7.
Right.
8. And so it can take quite a bit more time. And the whole idea is slower missiles moving down at the edge of the atmosphere, they can steer, and it's harder to send an interceptor up to get them at those speeds. I mean, they're traveling, miles a second type of thing. So the response time can be pretty tight. However, if there's no instant attack, those generals have room to maneuver, to decide and calculate and determine if they got to do something. But if there's something instant, let's say a submarine fired a missile, or some carrier got a missile in close and blew up someplace that the president was at, and now he can't communicate, either because the communications are down or he's been compromised or dead somehow, then the generals in these command locations have to decide how they're going to protect the country in an ongoing war until a new elected representative of the people can be put in place. Now, normally you'd have, say, the vice president takes that role as soon as you assume it. But if you have seconds and the missiles are in flight, maybe you can't get to them instantly. That's one of the reasons why it's highly unusual. It's never happened that I recall personally ever, but maybe it has, and I just wasn't aware of it, that you would have both the president and the vice president outside the United States proper at the same time. You'd have one out or the other, but you wouldn't have them both gone at the same time, so that if there was an emergency, if there was a crisis, a catastrophe, and it doesn't have to be an attack by a foreign country. If you have a sunspot, if you have, some craziness, some kind of natural disaster, that's some, biblical cataclysmic level, you want to have a commander available. What if, if both the president and vice president are gone at the same time? Then you have to go back to the head of the House of Representatives, Congress. Again, Nancy Pelosi being out of the country, if she had actually traveled on her trip with all her relatives and we came under some kind of a viral or bacteriological attack here in the country, and she's out, maybe the president and vice president both get ill, and she's on the other side of the world, and they can pick and choose how they bring her in so she doesn't get sick. At that time, it was very convenient on the timing. We don't know what actually was going on, but it was certainly convenient. So with that in mind, you could have an attack where the president is not available. Something has happened. He's been a victim or he's out of communication. Does that mean the generals can't do anything if the missiles are in flight or some kind of a crisis is going on? No. The generals have certain authorities and take those on in the interim until lawful civilian authority can be restored. And there's certain protocols that go on that have to be followed in order to, as quickly as safely possible, get a lawful representative of the people back into place. We're not a banana republic. We're not a junta, military junta or whatever. We're not going to be that way. We need lawful civilian representative authority of the people. That's the constitutional method that's been put in place for command and control of our military. It has to have a civilian authority running it. But in the interim, if in a wartime situation, some crisis has happened and the civilian authority is not available, then we go to a military authority. And if the question is that you couldn't hand off authority to the new authority because some crisis has happened, that authority is under the influence of, didn't happen, has been taken out, something has occurred, and you don't have that lawful civilian authority, you can't lawfully hand it off, then you have a commander-in-chief situation. If we used the 45 days, that would have brought it up to March 6th from January 20th. The military could have done its investigation during all of that time, paralleling using anything that came out of the Homeland Security side, investigation, Director of National Intelligence, plus anything uniquely available to the military through its own investigative tools. Then you allow for, once you have all the parts put together, the generals then review the information from each of the services, their own investigation, the investigative bodies, the comparison of the data that was available from the Director of National Intelligence in that late presentation, plus all the military sources, because you would want to move quickly. Yes. If they decided that this was in fact an attack on America, a digital Pearl Harbor, a digital 911, to put agents of foreign governments in control of our country at various levels, all the federal positions. It's not just the presidency or the vice presidency, by the way, but all the representative and senator positions, even governorships, etc. If there was some kind of a attack on America digitally or with ballot stuff to put other people in control, then the military would have taken a period of days. It would be very rapid. It wouldn't be the time that was taken for the general investigation. There is stuff that indicates 5 days is the proper amount, where each of the services has its own presentation from their investigative agencies, and then a determination, a vote, and a decision. That brings you up to an interesting day, and that's 3/11. It's also the inverse of 11/3. I've said all along, this is an Esther moment, 17th book of the Bible. This is all about reversals, the boomerang, etc.
Right.
And of course, the question is, if the military had to determine that the commander-in-chief had to be instituted, that role had to be instituted, a lawful representative of the people. If the election was frauded somehow, it would be as though it hadn't occurred at all, because it wasn't a legitimate election because of fraud. The outcome couldn't be trusted. If it was known who actually won the election, and it's my contention that we know exactly how the vote was frauded on the digital side. The paper side's being determined with stuff that's going on in Arizona and the other states. But from a digital side, we know very exactly where and how those flips occurred. And there was intelligence agencies involved outside the United States coordinating their efforts with intelligence agency personnel here inside the United States to do a handoff on that digital data inside the Dominion vote machines. That fraud, that digital Pearl Harbor, was such that it's actually known exactly what the outcome of the election actually was. But then here's the other problem you run into. Is there any requirement that the military determinations and decisions be made known publicly? No, because it's as though we're under an attack, which we are. And now military protocols have to come into place. We have to make decisions based on protecting the integrity of society so it can function. So the food arrives at the stores on time, so people can come and go from work and the economy and everything else, while we work through the details of how to get back to a lawful civilian government under control. It's as though we were under some kind of a nuclear attack, if you will, a WMD attack. And now you have to go through and figure out what's still working and what hasn't, what's been invaded, if you will. So, for example, reading in a new commander in chief. Once you've done that, does he instantly just go out like a bull in a china factory and tell the whole world, hey, this is what happened? Maybe you have to be a bit covert. You have to try to figure out, okay, and you read him in on what you know, but maybe you don't know everything yet. You just know enough to know what happened, but maybe there's still attacks yet coming. And so then he, after being ready, he says, okay, well, I need you to go track this down. I need you to find out where this person's at. We need to find out what the rest of the attack is that they have planned for us, because would somebody stop at the nation state level with just an attack on you digitally? Do they have other stuff in mind? Where are you still vulnerable? Getting your ducks in a row, figuring out if you know everything that you need to know. Yes. If there's any hidden things further that you have to do, you wouldn't just race off and just start screaming at that level. No, 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 whatever. And the most important component in all of this, and I've spoken about this a number of times, but people have to think about this again for a second. The president had numerous advisors on several occasions that it came to a certain culmination on December 28th, when a number of his closest allies, people who'd been in the fight over the vote situation and were contending that the fraud was very blatant and knowable. We could know how it had gone audit, and that the president needed to act to protect the country while he still had power.
Yes.
And they were, with the Insurrection Act and lots of other stuff. My contention is that this is like Casino Royale. In the game Casino Royale, in that kind of a challenge, there is no second place. One winner takes all of the pot home. You play until all the money is in one pot. Everybody's all in. There's no second place in Casino Royale. This fight to win this game at a global level, and it really is that kind of a situation we find ourselves in. This is like the greatest Bonzonian plot ever for control of the world. And in that kind of a situation, you can't take half measures. To have signed the Insurrection Act, for President Trump to say, I'm not stepping down because it's fraudulent, I'm instituting this and I'm going to do that. What you would have had, with the amount of information that was available at that moment in time, you would have had a great divide amongst the American people and people out across the world, because there would have been this huge argument that you can't prove the vote was fraud. You can't prove this stuff. And remember that was just a mere handful of days. That was 7 days. That was a week before this supposed riot at Congress, trying to have a riot in Congress and all this other stuff. And so had President Trump said, I'm not stepping down, but yet all these people are showing up in Washington, D.C., you could very well have had a riot in Congress. You could have had some kind of insurrection amongst the people that would have degenerated out over time into another American revolution, but not a revolution against foreign powers, but a civilian revolution, which is actually called a civil war. And that civil war would have resulted in a huge number of deaths, probably, and it would have resulted in a breakdown of society internally. Look at the various groups that are trying to cause civil war in America with Antifa and BLM. And they're trying to find ways to cause civil war in America at all these various state capitals and cities. And they're trying to put a divide, black and white, rich and poor, Democrat, Republican, men and women, genders, with the lesbian, gay versus straight. There's 100 different ways that society is being actively coerced to fall into some type of divide and chaos and civil war internally in America.
Yep, Juan,
And
but we are running out of time. We are really running out of time, actually.
All right,
I would love to, if you could finish this, and I really don't want to ask you another question, but I really want to. Well,
let me just finish this one thought. So
Please.
The whole point is that if you're President Trump and you know the story behind the scenes, he has intelligence sources that the people visiting with him there on the 28th of December wouldn't have had awareness of, that there was a far more precisely orchestrated plan to cause civil disturbance in America, leading to a civil war inside America. Would you have signed an order, done things saying, I'm not stepping down on the 20th and I'm not going to back off, and trying to ramp up your followers in order to have some kind of great civil disturbance in America? That would have been far more disastrous than most people realize. And the Civil War, would have been divided evenly or more evenly in society, because a lot of people didn't have the data.
Absolutely.
What's happened in the interim is that we have enough data developing, and it's continuing to develop, that it's becoming clearer and clearer what exactly happened in that election and in the time afterwards. And so that the numbers in society within the broad population, it's becoming more and more readily known and knowable that there was mischief, and that the outcome of the election wasn't what was said or agreed to. And that's the challenge. So we have to, that's still developing. But once the numbers are high enough, we don't have a civil war. We have some civil disturbances, but the majority of the population will have enough information that they'll be able to make a broader, more universal, agreed upon decision as a society to back whatever these next steps are. And that's what you needed this intervening time for, was to have the data become more solidified to where we have a corporate civil agreement amongst the people that, even beyond the politics, if somebody was externally managing the way the election went, it doesn't matter what your politics are. All of a sudden you go, look, I may not like the person that got elected here, but I don't want some foreigner coming in to aid to do that. We get the numbers up high enough, and the numbers 80+%, then you might have some pockets of civil disturbance, but you don't have civil war in America. And that's the genius of President Trump not proceeding on December 28th, because you did not have enough information out there developed properly to keep us from falling into some type of civil chaos. We will have a revolutionary war here in America, but it will be a revolutionary war, which means it's on the military side against foreign tyrants trying to manage our vote, manage the way that our people make the decisions or appear to have with foreign influence, like a digital attack and a militarized digital attack on America, a digital 911 weapon of mass destruction used against America by foreign parties to pick our leaders here in America. That's a revolutionary war against foreign rulers and foreign dictators and foreign powers, not a civil war, even though you may have some people internally that were working as traitors with those foreign influences in a seditious way. It's completely different. A revolutionary war against foreign powers, not a civil war, brother against brother. We're going to get this under control. It's becoming clearer and clearer, and we won't make the mistake that would have happened had President Trump acted back December 28th in the way those people saw. And these were faithful, honest Americans looking out for the best interests of America and the president. But President Trump had additional information. Had he done what they wanted him to do in advance of January 6th, what would have happened to America afterwards would have been what these people portray happened, but didn't. And you would have had civil war in America. And by right now, this summer, we would be in an entirely different type of dysfunctional civil chaos in our society here in America. It didn't happen. It has to do with the genius of President Trump. But, the last thing I'll say is that I talked about it in my book, and I talked about it more recently in the second edition. That right there is the code that the president and the first lady sent the last day, right there, January 20th of 2021. It's still all about the 2020 vote and getting
I see what you mean.
through the election fraud. And I've mentioned this in other shows. That cube is the code for 2021.
Juan, I really have to ask my next question. And
yes, go ahead.
I'm going to have to give you maximum 5 minutes to answer this one. It's a very quick. It's a much more of a straightforward question. Don't worry. It doesn't. Right. General Flynn, in a recent interview, said that there's going to be a big event on the 4th of July. And in the beginning of this interview, you said that you are going away and you need to be somewhere on the 4th of July. What are we expected to see on the 4th of July?
I don't think that's quite accurate on General Flynn's. It's within this period. So it's not a specific date as being only the 4th of July. There are disclosures coming that are going to continue to change the landscape. They're on multiple fronts. I think it's cumulative. And so it's not just a single thing, it's multiple things. And part of the reason that's important is because this is much bigger than, it's just like in a wartime situation, you'll have a primary battle, but there's a lot of battles happening around.
Hello, you still there? You've muted your microphone.
I bumped something. Is it still?
Yeah, I can hear you now, but I can't see you. I mean,
I don't know what happened.
I can't see your boots.
I have no clear idea what happened. I apologize, but let me just answer the question for your audience, because I don't want to lose them there. The reality is that we're talking about. There we go. Let's see if it's going there again.
Yes.
I don't know. Anyway, so the long and short of it is that there's multiple events coming, disclosures coming that are going to move the ball over these next weeks and months. A lot of it relates to the election data coming from multiple states. I would contend part of that from my side, and I'm not speaking for General Flynn here, is what's happening precisely starting from Nevada when George Soros came in to affect the election process in America in 2004 and 6. He targeted the secretaries of state positions, trying to get candidates into the secretary of state positions because they supervise the elections what's allowed, who does it, monitor to make sure it's done correctly. And he started in Nevada. Nevada's only got 6 electoral votes. It doesn't seem like it's that big of a place in the big scheme of things, but it's a hinge state. Now, while you've got all these states where there's people contending and everything, 2 things. Number one, there's no mechanism for changing the president once Congress and the courts have determined that a person's won. He's won. He's the president of the United States. But the superior position is commander in chief. And if you're under military attack, if you're in a militarized situation, the commander in chief position is the superior position. Mao said, all power emanates from the barrel of a gun. So the bigger gun in this situation is the commander in chief position. And if we're in a militarized attack, a militarized situation, commander in chief is everything. And so my contention would be that if the presidency is compromised, if there's some concern about that position, and you have a commander in chief, that's the moon. And the military recognized the true winner of the election, President Trump, took action. It's not publicly known, and now we're fighting back. And the way that we're fighting back isn't the way that most people think it would be. It's hearts and minds. It's getting the data out there so people can make an informed decision. That's why all the social media are coordinating their activities so as to control the information flow amongst the citizens. So in spite of that, we have to get information out that allows the citizens to make a fair and honest appraisal of what's going on. And that's this process of getting data out into the public, allowing it to be thought through, proven out. We're not doing the court in a physical courtroom. We're doing the court of public opinion. And this process of getting enough American citizens informed of what's going on really and who's behind it and how it happened to come to the right kind of a conclusion is everything right now. And really, it's not just there's going to be huge revelations over the next several weeks, but really out into the remainder of the summer and into the fall. And there's some serious gut punches coming. One in particular that'll be hard for people to get their minds around, related to President Trump, which, by the way, a president once elected is always president unless he's had his stripes removed. And of course, he was not impeached. He was voted for impeachment by the House of Representatives. He was not impeached because the Senate has to agree, and they didn't. So President Trump was never impeached. It was only voted for impeachment by a corrupt Congress. They did it just for political purposes. Yeah. So with that in mind, President Trump is still president, and President Trump's still got some attacks coming against him. We pray for him. But beyond that, we have some financial crises ahead that have been anticipated, and there's going to be a lot of drama there and out into the fall. People should not be in the mindset that this is all over in a day or a week or a month or two. And I know that they want that primetime TV solution. They need to have some deep breaths and enjoy the stability that we are having that was given to us by President Trump with his decisions, the way he didn't act, even at moments when people who were his very good friends had him do it. A poker player has to not telegraph his real intentions. It's all about playing the guy across the table from you and having them think they know what you're thinking or what you've got, and, not giving away the game. Yes. And so in Casino Royale for the whole planet, reading the other player, reading their cards, I'll tell you what, when this is all over, even the people closest to the president are going to have to tip their hat and acknowledge this was one of the greatest poker players in the history of the world.
Thank you. Yeah. Juan, thank you very, very much. I'm going to have to end this now. We've run out. We've well overdue our interview time, but it's been a wonderful and great honor to have you back on my show. It was very informative. Is there anything that you would like to say to the listeners before we finish?
You know, I appreciate getting a chance to speak with your listeners, especially out through the Commonwealth countries. You know, this isn't really just about America. This is for the world. Our interests are shared, combined. And I have, you know, just the greatest respect for those people that are trying to stay informed, understand this. This isn't just about us as Americans saving America, but this is about all of us working together to save the world from monsters, for real monsters that would seek to enslave us as a planet forever if they get away with it for their own purposes and means. I appreciate greatly the opportunity to close ranks with people of conscience who might be spread out anywhere across the world. And I appreciate very much you giving me the opportunity to speak with them. And my prayers are with all of you. I appreciate you giving me the chance to talk to them.
You are very welcome, Juan. Thank you so, so much. God bless you, and we'll speak again very soon.
All right. Fantastic.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.